Okay. So, what you have to bear in mind here is that the topic says 1949 to 63, but you have to be able to look at 1945 to 49 as well. Remember that 1945 to 49 is treated by the examiners in 3 different ways. They could legitimately set you a question about the war and its aftermath.
You did 45 to 49 last time.
Have I done 45 to 49? Are
You
you
did
sure?
it with the impact of war, because Sarah asked you about the zones.
Did I do about the zones? Did I do about the Berlin airlift and the Bisonia and the Trisonia and all of that? And the Truman Doctrine?
Bisonia and Trisonia.
Oh, yeah, okay,
I don't
so...
think you did the Truman Doctrine.
Right,
or...
I did the Truman Doctrine.
I don't think you did.
Right, okay. Well, I'll whiz through that quickly then, okay? So, just bear that in mind. If you get a question about East or West Germany, look at whether they're asking you to start date 49 onwards, which means you don't mention the zones, or 45 onwards, which means you can mention the zones and this particular Germany. So, let's see, you've got the Cold War, so you have to bear in mind that basically the Americans and the Russians hate each other, and they hate each other partly because of Germany, and Germany will be divided because they hate each other more generally anyway. You have the Potsdam Conference, where they agree that Germany will have economic recovery, they agree that Germany will denazify, they agree that eventually there will be a united Germany, they agree that Russia can have some reparations, but they don't agree on any of the details. They also agree that Germany will be divided into zones, including a zone for the French, and including the division of Berlin. It's very vague. That's the only way they can get anything agreed. If in doubt over why Germany was divided, you can always go back to, well, they all disagreed over Potsdam. And whenever they fell out, they always claimed that they understood Potsdam better than the other side. Don't talk about the allies within this. You've got the Western allies, which is the British, the Americans, and the French, and you have the Russians. Okay? So don't talk about the allies, because the allies sort of ends once World War II ends. You get the division of Germany. So what you have to bear in mind is that the Soviet zone says it's committed to democracy as per Potsdam, but really the communists are in charge. But the communists are a tiny party in Germany. Therefore, in the Eastern zone, the communists merge with the Social Democrats to create the SED, the Socialist Unity Party. It's really a takeover by the communists, but it makes the communists look better. The SED, dominated by Walter Ulbricht, a communist who answers to Stalin in Russia, who you might know is a communist, they dominate the Soviet zone. They are running politics in the Soviet zone, backed up by the Red Army if they need it. Okay? In the Western zones, you have small-scale political parties, you have a tiny communist party, you have the Social Democrats, you have the CDU, you have all of these parties, but they have to commit to democracy, and they can only become sort of across the whole of the Western zones if at a small scale they prove themselves. Okay? You also have to bear in mind that there is denazification. The main Nazis are executed after Nuremberg, but denazification in both halves of Germany essentially involves sort of whitewashing over the ex-Nazis past, because they'll be quite useful in the recovery of Germany. In the Western zones, you have what are called the personal certificates, the Fragebogen, which is where you can basically self-denazify yourself by filling in a form. The communists get away with using ex-Nazis better because they're communists, and therefore you could never accuse them of being Nazis. Okay? Bisonia and developments in the Soviet zone. What you have to bear in mind is that the British and the Americans want economic recovery, therefore they decide to merge their zones economically. The Russians are absolutely appalled by this and say, this isn't in the spirit of Potsdam, you're going ahead with it yourself, to which the British and Americans say, well, you can join in if you want, and they say, but hang on, in your zones, you're turning everything communist. And that's against the spirit of Potsdam, to which the Russians say, we're not turning everything communist, we're simply denazifying. So when they confiscate land and confiscate factories, it looks like communism, but they say, no, we're getting rid of the wealth of the type of people who supported the Nazis. So it's denazification, which is nonsense. Okay? So you have this massive divergence politically and economically. Even at this stage, lots of people are fleeing the Soviet zone. Okay? If you are going to have merged economic zones, the British and Americans decide you need a new currency, the Deutschmark. Stalin is utterly appalled by this. Stalin says, you're not doing this in Berlin, in your half of Berlin. The British, the French and the Americans say, yes, we are. Stalin blockades Berlin. What does he want to do? Push the British Americans and French out, but without starting a war. The British, French and Americans refused to go because the Truman Doctrine said very clearly communism will not spread. Truman wants a policy of containment, which is holding communism in. Therefore, they airlift everything into Berlin. It's a total propaganda triumph. It makes Stalin look stupid. Everybody decides Germany's got to be divided. So the trigger for the division of Germany is the Berlin blockade and airlift. It's clear that they don't get on. But, let's be honest, it was coming for a long time. You could say it was coming since Potsdam in many ways. Okay? The other thing you have to bear in mind is that they were discussing setting up their own western half of Germany as a country even before the Berlin blockade. So it wasn't like a spontaneous decision. That's the division of Germany. Okay? And then you have two halves of Germany from 1949. So firstly, the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, Communist Germany. Okay? Doesn't matter what you call it, East Germany, the GDR, the German Democratic Republic. Probably easiest just call it the GDR. It was the Soviet zone. Okay, it was the Soviet zone, now it becomes this. If you're talking about 1946-47, you don't talk about the GDR because it doesn't exist till 1949. In fact, if I remember rightly, it's set up in October 1949, technically in retaliation for the Western zones becoming West Germany. Now, if you are looking at the GDR in 1949, it's essentially a communist country, and in 1949, they openly become communist. Up until 1949, they pass themselves off as committed to democracy, and then they say, we're a party of the new type, we're a Stalinist party, we're essentially a communist party in all but name. They have political control, they have social control, they have economic control. It's very clear what the aims of the GDR are. Politically, control, communist control. And they achieve that. If you look at East Germany, it is dominated by the communists. It looks democratic, there are elections, you can vote for different parties, but if you look at the spider diagram about the GDR constitution, you will see that all those parties are either the SED, or puppet parties of the SED, or parties that have to join the anti-fascist bloc, which is dominated by the SED. The dominant political personality in East Germany is Walter Ulbricht, the General Secretary of the SED. Okay? In terms of regional challenges to the political power of the SED, there is none, because the Länder, which had loyalties dating way back, they're wiped out and replaced by the Bezirk, which are much easier to control. Okay? Socially, they want to impose a communist, inverted commas, more equal society. Do they achieve that? Yes, in many ways, I suppose they do. If you look at women, technically they are more equal, however, that simply means more work. If you look at children, they are brainwashed and they join the Ernst Thälmann pioneers. If you look at the church essentially capitulates because it accepts that the Jugendwehr can be compatible with Christianity. The Jugendwehr is the youth pledge, which is atheist. And the church says, we can't accept this. And the communists say, you will accept this. And the church says, okay, we give in. Okay? Economically, but hundreds of thousands of people are leaving. So if they want to transform and create a more equal society, it's not particularly working. Yes, there's lots of education for the plebs, but that's only because all the skilled people have run away. So you need to educate the plebs. You can dress it up as we're making a more equal society, but the reason there's jobs for women and jobs for thick peasants is because all the clever people have run away. Okay? Economically, they want to impose communism. Okay? In the countryside and in the factories. And as with Stalin's Russia, there is nationalisation, there is collectivisation, there are state-run factories. Technically, East Germany is a communist economy, but the economy is totally screwed up. It's like collectivisation in Russia. Yes, technically it's a success, but look at the statistics. It's a total disaster, which helps explain why so many people run away. Okay?
Yeah.
What you have to bear in mind is evidence that people are unhappy, therefore they have failed socially, and that they are unhappy and resent the political heavy-handedness of the communists, and they resent the economic misery, because remember there are work quotas, is the uprising of 1953. Mm-hmm. The uprising of 1953 is a response to the misery, the hardship, the work quotas, stuff like that. Mixed messages were sent out by the communists that encouraged people to protest. So the builders on Stalinallee downed their tools and went on strike because they sensed change after the death of Stalin. It all goes wrong. because the Russians don't like Ulbricht, but they're not going to let the protesters win. Ulbricht crushes the protesters with the help of the Red Army and the Stasi. So ironically, Ulbricht is more secure than ever after 1953 because the Russians won't now let him fall. It would look like the protesters had won. And he massively expands the Stasi, the secret police, so nothing like this can ever happen again. The Gestapo were relatively small fry. There weren't many in the Gestapo. The Stasi were everywhere. Your life was heavily policed. Your life was heavily controlled. People were trying to get out in their hundreds of thousands. Okay?
Yeah.
So you've got economic change. You have land reform, i.e. collectivisation. You have nationalisation and development of heavy industry. In terms of social change, we've mentioned this, the increased role for women and so on and so forth. The churches effectively capitulate. They are allowed to exist, but they have no real power. The trade unions, the workers, well, the workers have no independent voice, as in Nazi Germany. Any workers' organisations are part of the SED. Any youth organisations are part of the SED. Any sports organisations are part of the SED. Yes, as a worker, you can get a cheap holiday, but your working conditions, your living conditions are miserable, except for a few showpiece places. Okay? Like the Stalinallee blocks of flats in East Germany. Education is totally brainwashed. It's more equal, but as in Nazi Germany, you have brainwashing. You have a youth group that is dominated by political ideology. Okay, so that's East Germany. Now, what you have to bear in mind is the response of the East Germans to the brain drain, the response of the East Germans to people fleeing, the response of the East Germans to doesn't this look bad for us, everybody wants to leave, is to build the Berlin Wall. Ulbricht wanted to build the Berlin Wall for a number of years. Khrushchev, Stalin's successor, did not want him to. He knew what it would look like. By 1961, 62, 63, the flood of people is so horrific, he allows Ulbricht to build the wall. Ulbricht dresses the wall up as an anti-fascist protective barrier. He says fascists can infiltrate East Berlin from West Berlin, because remember, West Berlin is part of West Germany. Okay, so there will be spies there, and there is a better life there, and it is a good advert for capitalism. So in a sense, he's got a point. But to say it's an anti-fascist protective barrier is just communist propaganda. It's a wall to stop people running away. Okay, it's a propaganda gift, but it's also an admittance that the West is here to stay in West Berlin, because you have to build a wall because they're not going anywhere. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's the Berlin Wall. Now, the Berlin Wall is technically classed as part of West Germany. It's not technically within the East German topic, but they could easily ask you a question about the Berlin Wall and why it was built or things like that. Okay?
Yeah.
That's East Germany. So we'll have a logical break there.